I'm suggesting the Torah Experience.
Okay.
How do we look at the world? Let's answer people's questions. Maybe we'll get some guests on here from time to time, and we can have discussions about matters that are relevant and burning concern to every person. And we're going to start today with a question that we did not have a chance to address last week when we were developing more the concept of the worship of the idolatry of the intellect. The question this week we have from one of our viewers is, thinking about the idol worship of the intellect, then what type of content would a wholesome Torah-based curriculum include or exclude? Now, this could be applies obviously in school situations, and also would apply for someone who's going to homeschool their children. They have younger children, they have older children. So that's the question we're going to address tonight. Rabbi Chinuch, would you like to lead the way in answering this question?
The way we need to approach this is look into history and to see what is the Haredi chinuch and how did these people understand the outside world.
Rabbi Chinuch, could we pause 1 second?
Yeah.
You know that the word chinuch means dedicating a person into the service of God Almighty.
Yes, dedicating.
Can you tell our listeners what the word Haredi means?
Haredi means fear of God. So what Haredi is not just usually Haredi you can tell by their clothes, but it's nowadays that's not good enough, because they could have Haredi clothes but have an ideology of the Enlightenment. In other words, their Torah is basically in the books, and then the way they apply the Torah is what the Enlightenment tells them to. So you actually it will express themselves on the outward presentation often. It's going to be more of a modern presentation, but ultimately it's not the clothes, it's the outlook. That what is the traditional way of teaching? How were we taught from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, and what are the subjects that we teach? I would only teach. You would only teach the Holy Tongue, and you will teach it starts from before conception, or what a person. It's complex and detailed. It's a way a person behaves, and the way they present themselves to small children, and what type of information they're exposed to, only Haredi information. And then the way they understand the world is not through indoctrination, but it's through genuine observation of the outside world, to observe things the way they are, and then to understand them based on real Torah values. So sometimes it's a one line here of the Maimonides, and it becomes a whole way of living. I mean, I hope I'm starting to explain it a little bit. I mean, as little as possible outside foreign material.
So that would mean a parent's responsible to really look and examine what influences are coming to a child. I think that there's so many different ways. Thank God our children have been blessed to go to many fine Jewish chinuch, Jewish schooling. But I've noticed, for example, in one school, the kids were being taught in pre-1A or grade 1, they were getting little drawings of coloring pictures, stories about pigs. So I approached the teacher. I said, for all generations, the Jewish people have felt that the pig is not something that's appropriate. And she immediately said, we're going to address that right away. And it was addressed. But it's so easy today. Something that, a pig is something that would be so abhorrent for a person to even think of giving an image like that to his child, even if he's not particular about non-kosher animals in general for his children. But a pig is something that would be out of the question. So how did that happen? It happened because people are in the habit of trying to get easy sources, easy resources, and they just pull in stuff without thinking. Where can I find something on this subject? Where can I find something to entertain my kids? So I remember seeing in school one time, my kids came home with a little Disney book. This was from a truly Hasidic school, only spoke Yiddish. And the kids, a Disney book. And I asked about it, and like it was just they didn't understand what was so dangerous about. They were trying to teach the kids a little English. So they thought a Disney book would teach them a little English storybook. But they didn't realize the messages and the imagery and what was incorporated into that. So the job of being careful what we bring into our children's lives is the first and foremost the parents' responsibility, even if they're sending their kids to a place of education, a chinuch for multiple children, but it requires vigilance and the willingness to say no to something. My kids go to a Beis Yaakov, and the Beis Yaakov has as curriculum Shakespeare. And when I first heard that they were going to be doing Shakespeare, I said, that's not acceptable to me. I mean, Shakespeare was not only a person on the lowest status of society, as a theater has always been the leading edge of the demolition of civilization. And his eloquence notwithstanding, he is, and leaving aside the question of whether he was really an anti-Semite or he just was portraying anti-Semitism in The Merchant of Venice, but this is not something that my kids have any need to learn. And whatever time I regretfully spent learning Shakespeare, it was of no value to me. So I went to the school, and we were one of two families that wrote a letter. I wrote a letter to the principal, and I said, I don't want my children exempted from this. And she herself is the wife of a very distinguished Rosh Yeshiva. And so my children and her grandchildren from one of her son-in-laws were exempted from the Shakespeare. But it's a matter, the parent has to be vigilant, and I don't think I'm even vigilant enough. They're in English classes, they read other books which are just as bad, if not worse. So in terms of what you're saying, in terms of what you're saying, it's the parent has to be vigilant. So go ahead, Rabbi Sher.
Yes, I was just saying, who was it? Reb Zalman Bransky, Oliver Shalom, was one of the shluchim sent to Australia in the 50s, 40s, 50s. And he was 40 years old. He learned English at 40, and he got a very good vocabulary, and he was vigilant. He read through every single book in the school library, and if something was not appropriate, he edited it. He made it sure that all the food, the mental food consumed by the student will be edited. It requires that amount of vigilance. I mean, you can't eat you can't eat poison and expect that the person will be okay. I'll give you another example. There were very few people that remained Haredi in Russia. Two people, it was Chabad, and there was Breslov. And also it was only the people that went on self-sacrifice for the education of their children. In other words, if people were Orthodox, but they didn't go on self-sacrifice for the education of their children, that their families did not remain Haredi. So there was one of the Breslov people, his name was Brod, and he eventually became close to Lubavitch, and his grandchildren are Lubavitchers. So when he saw his grandson reading a secular book, he almost screamed, because they knew that these secular books from the 1800s, written in the 1800s, which were now being read at the beginning of the 1900s, destroyed the entire generation, the ideas in those books. So he could not handle his grandson reading a secular book. He was the destruction of his family. That's what he saw in front of his eyes.
Right, and they destroyed the Jewish world and destroyed the non-Jewish world also.
They destroyed the Jewish world.
Holocaust are the product of those books.
Right. So, and by the way, I have to say that he actually is is a paramedic that specializes in cardiology, a patient advocate for cardiology, and he's very good at pharmacology. And he never learned any secular studies ever till he went into paramedic school, and he became the best at understanding the way these medicines behave. Because sometimes when you're not exposed to the poisons of the primary schools, you understand things for what they are and the way they actually work.
You know, in terms of giving people skills, you see, when we dedicating our children into the service of God Almighty is not primarily about information, because the only information you need is that there's nothing besides God Almighty, and live like that. I mean, that's basically summarizes everything a person needs to know in life. So what's chinuch really about? It's about learning the skills to continue to think that way and live that way, no matter what you're presented with. And one of the things I told my children when I exempted them from Shakespeare is I said, if you are to decide, and later on as a young adult, that you want to open a book of Shakespeare, I am not going to stop you. But I want to show you that you are not obligated to ingest whatever curriculum is placed in front of you. You have the responsibility and the option to say yes to this part of the curriculum and no to that part of the curriculum. And that's what I'm training you how to do with your, so it's not just that I don't want them to have the Shakespeare information or the Shakespeare influence. I want them to learn that even though so and such a rabbi said he's permitting it in the school, and all the other rabbis are sending their kids to school without opposition to the learning of Shakespeare, nevertheless, I want to teach my children, you could say no to it. And that's the skill. I think that the first, when our reader or our viewer is asking this question about what type of content would a wholesome Torah-based curriculum include, exclude. So the first is the ability to shape your own intake of what you're going to let in. To train a child that you are the master of what you bring in. So as a child, we say you get to choose, you're the master of what you eat, both in what type of food, the quantity of the food, the timing of the food, right? You have to wait for Kiddush. You have to wait a certain amount of time between meat and milk and vice versa. You cannot eat this with that. We're training a child that with all the massive number of pieces of food points in the world, you choose what you're going to ingest. And here's our suggestions, according to what the Torah and our sages have taught us, as to what is the best intake for you. And the same thing is with points of data, points of information, points of people's thoughts. So a book is a play, a movie. These are all someone trying to present what he thinks is interesting and what you should be thinking. So I get to choose what I'm going to bring into my mind. And I was very blessed. My father, Olav Shalom, he refused to have a television in the house. And I thought that was, it brought me a lot of distress, and I complained about it and so forth, and made my objection known. Why can't we have a television like everyone else? He said, why would I open a sewer line directly into my living room? Because when the sewer line is open directly into your living room, you no longer have any choice what's going to come in. Whatever the sewer line, whatever the pipe comes into your living room, whatever's in the pipe is going to come into your living room. You can't stop it from coming in once it already came in. So a television is someone is sitting in a sewer production facility, and he's saying, what are we going to pump into people's living room? Once it came in, you can't unhear it. You can't unsee it. You can't control it. You can't erase it. So my father, thank God, had the wisdom, and his wisdom was not necessarily driven purely from a Torah perspective of the Torah doesn't want these particular concepts taught. He was driven by divine common sense. Why would I allow someone else to take over my mind and present what they want directly into my mind? Doesn't make any sense to do that. So I think that's what the parents have to take back, including the people who are observant, who understand what we're talking about. They're not on the guard. They're not they're not really understanding what their children are being presented with at home and in school and in the Jewish magazines that come in the all different angles.
Also, if a person does read a useful book, let's say a business book, what I do is I go through I've gone through the entire 14 books of the Rambam, and also Shara Yichud, and I'm start making a scan. Does this contradict anything that's written over there? And if it's a contradiction, I know this is not Torah compatible. So you really need to be, in order to be able to edit out, to be able to edit, read these books and be able to correctly make sure they don't poison you, you need to be able to have that background knowledge of the 14 books of the Rambam, of Shara Yichud, of other places of Tanya. You need to know those Sfarim off by heart, those books off by heart, in order to be able to scan through it. So something's wrong over here, and I'm not going to accept it. With the television, the information is coming so fast, you don't have time to be able to even edit it. When you're reading a book, you have the time to be able to say, is this, you can have a discussion, is this Torah compatible or not compatible? It's slow enough. So you really have to be very careful from television, entertainment, because information comes too fast to be able to edit. And for sure, for books for younger kids, if they don't have that Torah background, they're not going to be able to edit these books. So basically poison's going to go into them. So we need to be, like Rabbi you say, need to be very vigilant.
Very vigilant. I got a book, someone that people speak highly of is a guy named Dave Ramsey, and he has a book called Entre Leadership. And I thought it would be interesting to read based on his experiences of building a business himself. So I got the book and I read the introduction, and it's clear that he was writing it from an inspired spiritual perspective. But then he had a sentence in there that said, if a person's a reader and doesn't believe in God, kind of just ignore everything about God. And I was really bothered by that. I thought, why is he capitulating to the fact that there could be a reader doesn't believe in God? He could say instead, if you don't yet believe in God, then I hope what I'm writing is going to open you to a new perspective on life and what you're missing. But instead, and maybe an editor convinced them to do this. Often the editors say, well, you're going to alienate a portion of your readership. It could cut out half your readers. But it showed to me, and I don't want, he's not here to defend himself. Maybe we should have him on as a guest to try to ask him this question, why he would put that in there. But the way it struck me, at least, was there was some weaknesses in his determination to stick to his spiritual principles and transmit those in everything he was doing. That's the way it struck me. And again, all fairness to him, he's not here to defend himself. I didn't read the whole book. I stopped at that point. I was like, this doesn't resonate with me. And I think that that's an example where even a person who starts out with the right intentions, he could get too concerned about what other people think. And we have to be careful that even in Torah writings, people are trying so hard to not offend people, and to placate the audience, that the entire message is lost. And the end result is that not only do they don't communicate the truth, but the person who's reading it is lost in the process. And that soggy way of speaking and writing now becomes as if that's the reality. And the child who's brought up in that atmosphere doesn't have a clear understanding of what's right, what's wrong, where the delineations are.
And basically the Torah study lacks rigor.
Right.
It needs the proper rigor. We have to ask for sources, and how is your idea based on these sources, and how does it flow? It's very important to have rigor, and then to apply it. How do we see this in the outside world? We cannot, it's not two worlds, one of the books and one of the outside world. We have to match the outside world to what's really in the books. We have to have humility that we understand what it's saying, but with that humility comes the fact that it's supposed to connect to the world. It's not supposed to be something theoretical.
Eliyahu Kitoyev has in the back of his sefer, I think it's Ishu Beisai, has in the back of his sefer a list of what he suggests as the minimum curriculum according to what you're describing as the Haredi traditional chinuch. And I think that's an important source for a person who's interested in creating a curriculum to look at. But again, the key is not the content. The key, you could have a person who knows every verse in the Torah, but he's lacking the consecration of his own innate faith as front and center, and therefore his information is of no use to him or to anybody else. And therefore, as a parent who's asking this question, your job is first and foremost to make sure that the child's innate sense of divinity, innate sense of there's nothing besides God, innate sense that God is taking care of him or her, remains untouched by the thoughts that go through his head, by the sights that he sees at home, the way he sees his parents relating to the world and the challenges of life, and what he is exposed to in school and what he's exposed to in what he reads and what he sees in terms of entertainment. So that if the parent takes that responsibility seriously, it actually is not such a hard job, because you don't have to create the divinity in your child. The divinity in your child already exists, whether it's a Jewish person or a non-Jewish person. The sense of every human being is created in God Almighty's image. That's already resident. The only question is that we don't mess it up. So it's not a hard job. You don't have to create something in the child. You just have to make sure the child is trained how to ignore the influences of the world. And that is the most important.
There's also a concept of lineage, teacher to student to Moses. Am I faithful to those with a lineage?
That lineage is absolutely essential. Correct.
Essential. Yeah, because you could actually learn the whole Bible and all the Rashi and know it off by heart, but not be living in line with the culture of the lineage. So you have to connect to somebody that actually student to teacher teaches a student all the way from Moses. And am I understanding this in line with the way this person lives and the way it was passed down to us?
I want to thank you all for joining us for the Torah Experience, and encourage you to send an email to info@rabbismith.org with questions you want Rabbi Shirk and I to address in coming weeks, to try to share with you the Torah perspective on how to fruitfully and abundantly and beautifully live your life in God Almighty's world, both preparing for eternity in this world through raising a family, and for eternity in the world to come with making the right choices here in the here and the now. And I encourage you to send us an email, and we'll be happy to try to tackle your questions one by one. See you next
Shabbos.
Shabbos.